Hello and welcome back to the 3 on NY3 podcast, focused exclusively on New York's new 3rd Congressional District and on the race for Congress there this year. Thank you so much for listening or watching in really what is an experiment into local political coverage. Thank you. My name is Andrew Whitman. I covered local politics on TV for the better part of the past 15 years. Currently unemployed, still hopeful. Brighter days lay ahead. And I happen to be a resident in this new 3rd district. It's my district, so I figured, why not roll up my sleeves, dive in, and mix metaphors. We are now up to episode number 7 of the podcast. And again, we will sit down with a Democratic candidate in the race in just a moment. I have been asked to plead with you to subscribe to 3 on NY3 wherever you're watching it or listening to it. Give it a like, give it a 5-star rating. That makes the show better. That might even make me better too. So I'll sweeten the pot with that for you. A couple of quick notes. First, on the podcast itself, not only is our audience growing week by week, as we had hoped when we launched this thing, we have picked up listeners in Ireland, in Russia, and at least one very dedicated listener in France. Thank you. And we have now confirmed that we will have interviews to round out the Democratic primary field. Every Democratic candidate should have appeared or will appear on this podcast by the end of next week, so that's good news. At that point, we'll be hoping to move on to debates between candidates and other coverage of the race as we now enter the final 2 months leading up to primary day. We're also monitoring the court case that's continuing over the statewide congressional map in New York. A second state court has now ruled against the current map. The case now headed to the top court in New York, the Court of Appeals, this week. We will see if that changes the district, and if so, it changes the podcast. For now, the map remains the same. The field of candidates remains the same. And so today we sit down with Melanie D'Ariggo from Port Washington. Melanie D'Ariggo, candidate for Congress in New York's new 3rd district. Thank you for joining 3 on NY3.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's start with the status of your campaign. We've just been through the petition process. You got enough signatures. You're on the ballot. How is the campaign looking? What are the numbers telling you? What is your team telling you?
Yeah, we're in great shape. Our momentum is building. The energy is palpable. We're just really excited. As you may know, I ran for this seat in 2020, so it feels like we've been running for 2 consecutive cycles. We have built some very deep bonds with the community, and we're continuing to build those new bonds with the newer portion of the district, which we're just thrilled about. So it's really exciting. We're home stretch, the final sprint, and we couldn't be more excited about where we are in the race right now.
So tell us a little bit about Melanie D'Ariggo and what sparked your passion for public service and just who you are in general for people who haven't met you before.
Yeah, well, look, I think there are those folks who always know they want to, be in Congress or be the president, right? We hear those stories all the time. Mine is quite different. I was never that person that thought that was the path for me. Look, I spent my career as an allied health professional on the preventive health side, helping folks live healthier lives, both with patients and families and later organizations. And I loved my career. But as a citizen of this country, as a community member, as a mom, as a lifelong New Yorker and Long Islander, I do have, deep rooted connections to my community and, which propelled me to get involved. I started helping where I could. And then the 26th primary happened. And frankly, I had known bullies like Donald Trump, throughout my life, and I could not believe what I was seeing. And that really propelled me to get involved more. So I started stepping up my advocacy, first with groups like Planned Parenthood, fighting for reproductive justice, and then with Moms Demand Action for common sense gun safety legislation. And from there, it just, it started my journey. Unfortunately, as we all know, we had someone representing the United States that as president that I'm not quite proud of, but we had a lot of fights ahead of us. And I I am someone who is somewhat of an empath, and I felt the pain of my community. So I really felt called and propelled to get out there in the streets and on the front lines and start organizing. And so I did that through a variety of ways and a variety of organizations. I'm connected to many grassroots groups across the state and do some work on the national level as well. In fact, I serve as the district rep for Medicare for All for National Nurses United. I'm a delegate to the National Organization for Women of New York. And I'm been a longtime volunteer for immigrant rights organizations, and I've been an ardent supporter of getting corporate money out of politics. When I saw that, our current representative, who of course is no longer running, was not living up to what I consider to be democratic ideals, I tried to find someone to run against him. And when that didn't happen, and as maybe as cliche as this may sound, I didn't mention, but I'm a mom of 3 beautiful children. And I always tell them, if they don't like something, that they should change it. They should work to make the world a better place. That's our responsibility as human beings. And so I felt those words heavy on my heart, and with a lot of encouragement from the community and my family, I stepped up to run, and that's why I'm here today. We're back to finish the job.
So I think you've answered the first part of my next question, which is why are you running for Congress? So I'll shift the focus to the second part of this question. Why do you think you would be a better fit to represent this new 3rd district in New York than any of your other challengers in the Democratic primary field?
Yeah, well, look, I believe I'm the only candidate in this race that's running for change. Look, there are folks that have been around, they've got experience. We're fortunate that there are a lot of candidates in this race, a lot of opportunity for our constituents to choose who may best want to represent them. I do believe that our work is cut out for us, right? We've got a lot of work to do on the federal level. We have some really big fights ahead. And I think the only type of representative that's going to get that done is one that has not been afraid to be the lone voice in the room. Look, I have been fighting for what I consider to be the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party and progressive policies before they were popular, before they were polling well. I ran in this race in 2020 as a progressive because I believe that this district deserves a representative that fights for working class and middle class people. I know what it means to fight for my community because I've been doing it for years and years in this district. I helped found the Sunrise Movement in Nassau County. And I told you a little bit about my organizing experience before. I have very deep, deep roots. I also co-founded an LGBTQ nonprofit in the district and organized the very first Pride celebration in North Hempstead's history. But look, I'm a former union member. I think I'm the only candidate in this race that has a labor background. I come from the people. I understand the issues that middle class families are facing because they're the same issues that my family has faced, right? And I think if we want a leader that fights for the grassroots, they have to come from the grassroots. And I'm the only candidate that has done that work.
All right, so with introductions out of the way, we're going to shift into our first topic of focus. As you know, I give the candidates their choice of 2 topics, and we talk about them for 20 minutes each. And once you start your first answer, we will find out what apex sounds like on my timer. That'll be the alarm in 20 minutes. The first topic that was offered by you was combating corruption, which is intriguing, if not a little bit broad. Normally, I would start by asking to define the problem and why it's the top issue for you personally. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start, though, by asking, what do you mean by combating corruption?
Right. Well, I believe we're currently fighting for our country. We are fighting to preserve democracy. We are fighting to preserve this great republic of ours. And even though, we have a new president, the battles ahead are vast and they will be tough and they will be difficult. And they're only exacerbated by the current very corrupt system that has unfortunately been exacerbated by Citizens United. So for the viewers who may not know what Citizens United is, I'm sure you've heard about it. It was a Supreme Court case in 2010 that essentially deemed that corporations are people. And in practicality, what that has amounted to is corporations donating and funneling billions of dollars into the political system. And what happens is essentially it allows corporations to buy votes, to buy policy, and ultimately buy your politicians. Now, I am a candidate that stands for the people, not for the profits, right? And I believe that it is this corrupt system in place that prevents us from passing the legislation that we need. I mean, we saw this with Build Back Better, and we see this with virtually any type of large policy fight that we have, right? So when I say we need to get corruption out of politics, that really means we need to get corporate money out of politics. We need to get dark money out of politics. So I've been a champion of overturning Citizens United for a very long time. But truth be told, that will take quite some time because it will take a constitutional amendment in order to do that. So I do have, quite a bit of an extensive agenda in terms of how other ways we can combat it on the way to overturning Citizens United. But that is an absolute must if we believe in preserving this country's democracy. It's an absolute must. So Andrew, I mean, I'm happy to keep going and talk more about different policy perspectives here.
I'm happy to do that, and in fact I think we'll have more time to do that. But you said that there are other steps that we can take to try to keep money out of politics, short of a constitutional amendment or getting a Supreme Court ruling that reverses the established Supreme Court ruling that allows this money into politics. So
Right.
What steps would you take short of a constitutional amendment or getting a reversal from the Supreme Court?
Right. So in 2020, I introduced what I call the Paid By Act, Politician Accountability Information Disclosures Benefiting You. Quite a mouthful, but I think certainly a necessary step on the pathway to overturning Citizens United. And essentially, what it would do would be to require politicians and candidates to disclose who they're taking money from if there is a competing vote. And certainly, we do have a system in place that's very difficult to navigate, that the average person is unaware of. As candidates, and certainly incumbents are also regulated to disclose and certainly report to the FEC where their money is coming from. Of course, this is not the case for super PACs where we don't know where that money is coming from. But what this would look like in a practical sense is, let's say we were voting on a climate bill. And Joe Manchin says, no, I'm not voting for this. And he would have to disclose all the money that he has taken from the fossil fuel industry. I don't think, and I know this from knocking tens of thousands of doors, when you have conversations with the average voter, they're aware that there are lobbyists, but they're not acutely aware of just how integral lobbyists are to determining our future and really, buying our legislation, which has happened over and over and over again. This particular cycle, I have expanded on the Paid By Act and included a separate sort of, it will be like an amendment, if you will, to help uncorrupt the judicial system. We have ultra right-wing corporations funneling money into, the Federalist Society and other groups that have funded these right-wing judges. And certainly we've seen 3 out of 4 of the last Supreme Court judges came from the Federalist Society and are, there were massive campaigns waged, in their favor. But we're also seeing it for federal judgeships as well. And these will be the folks that serve on the Supreme Court moving forward. And they're the folks that decide, many of our fates. And if we're packing these courts with ultra-right conservatives, that is a big problem for the future of our country.
I'm curious because as we saw through the Trump Supreme Court picks, and even to a certain extent with Biden's recent pick to the Supreme Court, while those disclosures haven't been made formal by the nominees themselves, we've certainly had plenty of reporting about some of the money that's been going into some of these judicial campaigns. Disclosure in that sense hasn't seemed to matter that much, at least when it comes to public opinion. Would disclosure directly from the sources be better than the sort of reporting disclosures that we've had? And what's to say that people will care even if they do? I mean, there's a certain expectation that right-wing groups are going to be lobbying for right-wing judges, left-wing groups will be lobbying for left-wing judges.
Well, it's more than lobbying, and I think that's important, right? It's not just folks making a phone call or showing up at an event and saying, "Hey, I think you should go with my pick." That is definitely not what's happening. There is almost a legalized bribery happening, and this happens across the board. There are donations being made. Many of the ultra right wing corporations that are funding these judges are also funding these politicians. So there's very much, wash my hand, I wash yours happening. Another piece of my plan as it pertains to the judgeship, judge appointments, it would require the administration office of the United States courts to investigate the nominee's history and make those public disclosures and findings and recommendations to the Senate before votes to confirm, which I do think is important. Likening that to the Congressional Budget Office and the CBO score, which has become very important in political discourse and political debate. I do think that's important. I think we need to demystify the process. Most people, especially middle-class families, are in a hamster wheel, right? And they're struggling to survive, and they don't have the time generally. I mean, I can tell you as a candidate, we spend more hours than I'd like to admit reading through bills and policy, and it's just impossible to keep up to date on all of it. So I believe we need to make it as easy as possible and as transparent as possible for Americans to understand what's happening. Look, anti-corruption policies and getting corporate money out of politics, even overturning Citizens United, is wildly popular across both sides of the aisle. Well, I should say with Republicans and Democrats, not the aisle, because we know politicians don't want to do it, but you know what I mean, with Democrats and Republicans.
Fair enough. I want to shift to the executive branch, because when we went through the Trump administration, we certainly had a number of cases. The president himself did not release his tax returns. I assume that you would be in favor of making that required. What kinds of disclosures and other information would you like to see for nominees and appointees within the executive branch? And is there a way to give that some enforcement power to actually prevent people in certain situations from accepting those appointments or from being nominated, to try to prevent a repeat of some of the dealings that were reported on inside the Trump administration?
Yeah, look, I think it should absolutely be disclosed, and we need fair and balanced reporting on that, which is, something else we've been struggling with as a nation these days. I am very much in favor of bringing as many people into the process as possible. I mean, that is what we're here for, right? We are here to represent the people. We are here to represent the country, but we have seen the chasm grow wider and wider, and what goes on, whether it's in the executive branch, the judicial branch, or Congress, right? We are seeing something entirely different than what our founders had intended. So look, I think, it does have to be in conjunction with the people. It does have to be in conjunction with bringing more folks into the process. But, that will have to be, of course, legislated to determine, are there certain requirements? Right now, it is legal for corporations to, funnel billions of dollars and buy politicians and buy policy. Does that mean it's ethical? I don't think so, but unfortunately right now it's legal.
What about the impact of influence groups? Those are the groups that are supposed to not be working in coordination with campaigns, but oftentimes their messaging seems to be either linked, or these quote unquote nonprofit groups will be ahead of campaigns in sort of making incendiary attacks and attacking on issues and other areas. You can't stop that. A group has the right to free speech. How do you limit that? Is that something that should be limited?
I think we should have the money disclosed, right? We super PACs, we don't know who's really giving. We don't know where that money's coming from, so that money should be disclosed. I mean, frankly, I think we could solve this whole problem with publicly financed elections. If we did that, we could limit, the influence of independent expenditures from these outside groups, and I do think it would create a more balanced playing field and a more representative America. Right now, we see over and over and over. We see this every cycle. The candidates that win are the politically connected candidates. They're the generational politicians. They are the wealthiest among us. And I say it all the time to folks, we can't be too hard on our congressional representatives who don't understand what it's like to go to bed hungry, who don't understand what it's like to balance your mortgage payment versus gas in your car. They don't understand the stress of saving to send your kid to school, or the impact of a paid leave program on working Americans, because they've never, ever had to experience it personally. Theoretically, they may have some understanding, but they don't know what it's like to struggle because they are millionaires and billionaires primarily, right? So of course, it's logical that they are going to legislate through the perspective of millionaires and billionaires. Publicly financed elections would flip the script. It would allow community leaders to step up and run for Congress. We would have more people of color, more women, more mothers. That is what I believe we need if we want to maintain this republic. We need the people to rise, but we can't just say, Andrew, this whole pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. Well, you don't even have shoes. You don't have bootstraps. We need to at least give the bootstraps so folks can pull them up.
We've just had a political corruption case in the headlines here in New York, the lieutenant governor resigning from his position accused of corruption. But in recent years, the definition of corruption has been really watered down, especially by the Supreme Court after the Bob McDonnell case. And that's impacted cases in New York, where there have been New York corruption cases that have been overturned. And then in some cases, the reconvictions have happened afterwards. But does the definition of corruption, of political corruption, does that need to be redefined legislatively?
Maybe it should. Maybe it should, but it's a cyclical problem, right? Because you're not going to have politicians who are on the take, actively participating in good faith to create legislation to, decrease their money. I can tell you, when I ran in 2020 against Tom Suozzi, who's a prolific fundraiser, 98% of his donations came from big money. Only 2% of his donations came from small dollar donations. I mean, that is an unbalanced system.
Quick question. Does that, by your definition, suppose that he ran a corrupt campaign, or that he is corrupt?
No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we need to. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to draw the lines when a politician, and I'm not here to talk about Tom, or disparage him in any way, even though we have a lot of disagreements. But when a politician is getting money from the fossil fuel industries and then votes against climate action, that's something we need to understand why. I mean, you take Joe Manchin, for example, who totally did a 180 on that. When you see, and a lot of congressional representatives, unfortunately, at the height of the child separation policy at the border, were taking money from weapons contractors, and then they voted to expand detention centers, and then they tried to sell the bill like we were doing something good for immigrants and undocumented folks at the border, right? I mean, we see this over and over and over and over again. This is nothing new. How many politicians take money from big pharma, from insurance, from medical suppliers, and they're adamantly against Medicare for all, yet they're all talking the same talking points from Third Way, right? So that to me is a form of corruption. It is legalized bribery, in my opinion. And I do think if we want to remain a republic, if we want to keep this exercise in democracy going, we are really at the edge of a cliff right now. And I think we need more grassroots candidates who refuse corporate money if we want to get back on track.
There have been calls for term limits as a way of limiting corruption. Critics of that idea say, well, there are term limits. Every 2 years, members of Congress have to go back before the voters, and they're the ones that can apply term limits. Do you support the idea of term limits as a way of combating corruption?
Look, I am absolutely in support of term limits. I wouldn't start there. I don't think that's the be all end all, but it would limit corruption. Look, you asked a moment ago about, what ways we could reduce corruption. We're having a lot of conversations right now about the Stock Act, right? The fact that members of Congress can trade individual stocks while still managing or having access to manage their personal financial portfolios. That seems like corruption to me, right? There have been many reports where there are quite a few representatives who have violated that Stock Act. That's a basis in corruption for me, and I think that those folks should resign right away. But look, there's a myriad of of interventions and legislation we can pass to reduce corruption. But at the end of the day, I think saying, well, every 2 years is the term limit, I think that's short-sighted, because we all know that it's not always the best candidate that wins, right? As we spoke about a minute ago, there are all these outside groups influencing the political process. There have been many candidates that would have been excellent legislators that unfortunately didn't have access to wealth, didn't have access to the political connections. Mailers can cost, upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So if you're a great candidate, how are you supposed to get that message out? All of that money coming in absolutely influences an election. And let's be honest, oftentimes the message that they're portraying is not an honest, genuine message. It's frankly, they're usually misleading at best and lies at worst to sway voters to go a certain way.
So you've mentioned a few specific areas that you would label corruption that needs to be combated. I'm sure you have others at your disposal. What are some other areas that you see making for a corrupt system, and how would you try to remedy that?
Yeah, well, look, I also think, an additional measure, and Senator Warren had a great plan for this. We have to end the government to lobbyist pipeline. It is absolutely a revolving door. And this is really the extension of that wash, I'll wash your hand, you wash mine, and it keeps going and going and going. And as long as these politicians, do the bidding of their lobbyists, once they leave office, then they get a very well-paying job at a lobbyist firm, and they continue the cycle with their contacts that they've made in Congress. That furthers corruption. So I think
what's your remedy for that? Should it be 5 years, 10 years before?
I'd love to see at least 10 years. Personally, I'd love to see at least 10 years. I think that's, certainly politicians are allowed to make a living, for sure. But I don't believe that this short time gap where they can then use, their contacts to lobby folks on behalf of corporations to benefit their bottom line, and let's be honest, it's always at the expense of all of us, should be allowed. That is corruption. So, if we had, a several point plan, it would be, in an ideal world, we overturn Citizens United. On the way there, we passed the Paid by Act. We absolutely ban members of Congress from trading individual stocks. I mentioned we end the government to lobbyist pipeline, and term limits I'm great with. No corporate PAC money would also be a wonderful agenda. I mean, I don't take any corporate PAC money. I have invited the candidates and my opponents in this race to do the same. We'll see how that ends up shaking out. But frankly, publicly financed elections would take care of so much of this. And it's a shame that we see so much resistance from it in Congress. I can tell you, as a candidate who has run 2 cycles, raising money is one of the most difficult parts of running a campaign when you are not connected to immense wealth. You spend so much time on the phones when your time would be better spent helping your community out in the community. And having publicly financed elections would change the face of this country for the better.
And assuming that you would not be able to go immediately to there from here, just because of the politics that are involved, are there incremental steps that can be taken, or is the best approach, short of waiting for a majority of votes in Congress to help institute some of those reforms, just to sound the alarm and be as vocal as you can?
Yeah, well, look, I think, unfortunately, there's not just one easy solution, and I know I'm beating up on Joe Manchin a little bit today, but, he was a chief sponsor of the For the People Act. And then when it came down to pass it, all of a sudden he flipped and he didn't want to support it anymore. In the For the People Act, we had amazing provisions that I think would have safeguarded our democracy for the better, including publicly financed elections, right? And I think we see this this deception where representatives try to deceive the public and say, oh, of course I support this. I absolutely support this. But then when all of a sudden the votes are there, they do a 180. That's a problem. And I'm not sure how we combat that just yet. I can tell you, as someone who is organized for years and years and years, the most effective tool that I have found is just by getting in the community and educating people on what's really happening. I think it's why we've been able to build the broad coalition that we've built in this district. It's why we continue to grow. It's why we have moved people along the spectrum from, our current healthcare system to Medicare for All, is how we moved people to move on climate action. And frankly, that's what we'll continue to do until we have a majority of grassroots candidates who are in this to represent people over, corporations.
As you may have heard during that last answer, we heard what the apex alarm sounds like. That means our first 20-minute segment is over. I'm now going to reset the alarm for bulletin. We'll figure out what bulletin sounds like in 20 minutes.
Okay, fun.
And with that, we shift on to the second topic that was chosen by you in your campaign, and that is Medicare for All. We know, I think most voters have a pretty good idea of what Medicare for All is, but why don't you remind people what it is and what it isn't, and why it's such a key issue for you, and how that issue came to you and how you came to it?
Yes. Well, let me start with defining it, because I think there still is a lot of confusion out there over what Medicare for All is. Medicare for All, I think, is a bad name. I think the intent was good, but I don't think it adequately describes what the bill is, right?
What would you name it if you could?
Healthcare for All.
There you go.
Healthcare for all. Very simple, very clean, very easy. But simply put, Medicare for All is a universal healthcare system that would provide healthcare for everyone living in the United States. It would also cover dental, it would cover vision, it would cover long-term care, it would cover hearing aids, something that traditional Medicare does not cover. So it would be a more comprehensive healthcare plan. Now, there would be no copays, no deductibles, and it would also reduce the price of prescription drugs to a maximum of $200 per year, which, sounds lovely. And I know, the talking point is always, well, how would we pay for it? And there are many different proposals for how we would pay for it. Employers would pay a piece, employees would pay a piece. There's some other funding mechanisms that, could potentially be added. But here's the thing. Right now, our current system is unsustainable, and everybody knows it. Insurance carriers know it, and politicians know it. We all see what's happening each year, especially if you're in an employer-sponsored plan. Every year, your health insurance premium goes up. So the money that you're paying out of your paycheck each week or every 2 weeks, that is going up. And the level of service, the level of care, the level of benefits is going down. Here's the real rub. The United States is the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a universal healthcare system. Let me say that again, because I think that is very, very important. The United States is the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a universal healthcare system. We are paying more money for less care. We rank dead last in access to care, in administrative efficiency, equity, and patient outcomes. And frankly, when we look at how we rank across the sort of comorbidity scale, we are either at the bottom or very close to. And we can go, individually specific issues, but frankly, it is such a stain on this country, especially after going through a global pandemic, that we as a country have decided to let people stay sick and die rather than provide universal health care, which politicians know, and everyone else who is involved in this conversation understands that universal health care would be less costly and it would save lives. In fact, it is estimated to save 68,000 lives a year and $450 billion a year. So it is not only the morally responsible pathway forward, it is also the fiscally responsible pathway forward. I know you asked me how I came to this. I mentioned earlier, I spent my career as a healthcare advocate. I spent my career building preventive health strategies and working with patients and families. And I did population health management strategies for organizations all over the country and some global companies. I have been invested in helping people live healthier lives, since I started my career. And I have seen up close the inequities. I have seen up close the deception of insurance companies. And frankly, I know that we can do better. And I will say, I know some folks have come around to universal healthcare, which is great. I'm very happy to have them on this team. But it's still not enough, frankly. Universal healthcare is really, and our current healthcare system, even though we call it healthcare, it's really sick care. I think we need to shift the model completely in this country and work toward a more preventive health program, right? Or a preventive health system. And what that looks like is access and equity to healthy food, to exercise spaces, green spaces, funding for our schools. It's all connected. And I think we've got a real opportunity to do a whole lot better.
This is just a touch off topic, but during the pandemic and the lockdown, I assumed that there would be a growing call to decouple healthcare from work, that employer-sponsored healthcare was a model that would be proven to be less effective, especially as people went and lost their jobs during the course of the pandemic. That hasn't been the case, really. The numbers haven't really moved that much on it. Why do you suppose that is, and how important would that be to give people a chance to unshackle healthcare coverage from their employers?
Well, let's be clear that universal healthcare is wildly popular in polling, right? It polls at about 70%. That's pretty good. It's very, very high. So I do think that during the pandemic, and this is sort of anecdotal, I had many conversations with folks who initially were not sold on Medicare for all. And, I was out in 2019 and in 2020 campaigning on it, and they were sort of curious, but they said, I don't know about that. Who then came back to me and said, you know what, I never realized just how close I was to losing my healthcare. Because you know what, it's terrifying. It was terrifying for families living through a global pandemic when, that tension is super high. We didn't know a lot about COVID-19 back then. And to think that if you lost your job, you would lose your health care. And then what if your family got sick and people were getting sick all around us? That's terrifying, right? And I think that that's an exercise in privilege because frankly, that is what poor people and folks who are underinsured and uninsured go through every single day. They live with that fear, right? And I hope that through campaigns like mine and so many others who talk about the benefits of healthcare, of universal healthcare, my hope is that, we'll bring more folks on board, and it will become, at least on the Democratic side, I hope on the Republican side as well, but it will become so unacceptable for a Democrat to not support universal health care that we'll have to push it through, similar to what we've seen with Roe v. Wade, right? That's where I would ultimately like this issue to move toward.
From time to time, and especially during the pandemic, we would see stories about people who incur massive hospital costs and have to go on to GoFundMe or some other fundraising mechanism to raise the money in order to pay for their hospital bills. And a lot of those people strike me or seem to have the position that they are opposed to universal health care or Medicare for all. I'm curious if that's an argument for people in that position for Medicare for all, for universal health care. And how would you go ahead and make that argument to somebody who needs help to pay the bills, but on some level doesn't feel like that's the universal works?
I feel like you're really teasing out this anti-corruption platform here because it's all tied together. I often say, the greatest trick the people in power ever played was convincing us that we don't have any, right? And as Americans, we grow up thinking that we live in the greatest country in the world, even though we don't have the best healthcare system. We have the worst healthcare system, right? But we are fed this line of thinking, and we are also fed, and as someone who grew up in a working poor household, there's a certain amount of pride that I think we see, and I think this is national pride, that we work hard and we do the right thing, and it doesn't matter our circumstances, doesn't matter the cards you've been dealt, you just have to play them right, right? And I think that is this sort of American mantra. And when I have these conversations, people will say, well, isn't that a handout? I don't need a handout, but yet they can't even afford their cancer medication, right? I think it's about access and education. We have to let folks know. Most people do not know, by the way, that America is the only industrialized country in the world that does not have universal health care, right? And I think when we bring these facts, we can move people. And I've done that. I've done that on the doors, and I've done that in living rooms. I've done that at events. And I think it's about trying to meet people where we're at. But, you have folks who are acting in bad faith, and that's really important, right? Somehow Mitch McConnell rebranded the ACA as something like Kentucky Care or something. And, there's a quite famous reporter who went around knocking on doors, and, it's the same program, and would ask folks, well, what do you think of Kentucky Care? Oh, it's the best. Mitch McConnell's really looking out for us. What do you think of the ACA? Oh, it's doomsday. It's the worst thing ever. It's the same thing, right? So I think we need to do a better job of really being transparent and educating people. And that really goes back to that corruption piece, and electing candidates who are in it for the right reasons, who are in it to uplift and protect and provide opportunities for, all Americans.
You hit on some of the greatest hits of the critics of Medicare for All in your answer there, but let me run through the gauntlet for you. It is socialized medicine. It's the government getting between you and your doctor. It's going to lead to long waits for you to get a procedure done. It's going to stifle innovation, particularly for pharmaceutical companies who, yes, they make profits, but they spend billions on products that don't come to market. So how are you going to keep that innovation going? How do you respond to those criticisms?
Yeah, it's not. So look, we want to say I've responded to it's socialized medicine a million times. I would say, what are your favorite services in your town, right? So Andrew, tell me what you live. Tell me about, what are the public services that you really like in your town? I bet you think you have an outstanding library. I bet you think you have outstanding public schools, maybe a wonderful fire department, a police department. Am I right?
I think that depends. I think that the library could be a little bit better here in Portchester, but for the most part, so far so good. Anytime the fire department's knocked on the door, I've been relieved.
Yeah. Well, generally, when we talk to folks, these are the sort of bedrock of democracy, the bedrock of our country and our communities, right? People love their libraries. They love their public schools. And even if they, there's always room for improvement, they're proud of their public schools. They're invested in their public schools. These are all socialized services, right? So to me, there's a great disconnect there. So, and when I say that to people, I often get this sort of, laughter or like jaw dropping, and so it's just really about reorienting the message, I think. And forgive me, what you threw a lot out there for me. What were the other?
It was will stifle innovation, will stifle long wait times for doctors.
Long wait times. That one's one of my favorites. So the way the system would work is very much, the same as you think about an emergency room, right? If you're coming in with an emergent condition, you're going to be seen right away. If it's something that is less emergent, you may have to wait, a little bit more time. But frankly, that is our current system as well. If you call a specialist in this country right now, even a general practitioner, oftentimes as a new patient, you're going to wait a month. You're going to wait 3 months. You try to, and for all the ladies out there, if you call a gynecologist, you're waiting 6 months before you're in as a new patient. That is our current system. And we see this with surgeries too. You've torn your ACL. It's not so bad. You can wait. We're going to push you out. Oh, your gallbladder needs to be removed. That happened to me this summer. They wanted to schedule my surgery like 3 months out. And then thankfully someone canceled and I got to go in earlier. And I said, well, what if it ruptures? Well, then you just go to the emergency room. That is our current system, right? I don't think folks realize just how much it would improve our society, to make sure that everyone has access to high quality healthcare. And if the concern is, well, what about doctors? If everyone is seeing them, then there won't be any time, et cetera, et cetera. Look, we see a bump with regular Medicare, right? So there, when you look at trends and visits to the doctor, there's a significant bump at 65, right? Where folks are going to the doctor. And that makes sense. And of course, there will be a bump when all of a sudden everybody has access to high quality healthcare. But what we also have to remember is that we're cutting out the waste. We're cutting out the administrative time, which is estimated to be anywhere between 9 and 15 hours a week for doctors. When you have conversations with the majority of doctors, I'll tell you something. They didn't get into medicine so that they can argue with the insurance company that their patient needs a certain test or their patient needs a certain medication. They were called to the medical field because there's something in them that makes them want to heal the world and heal people and help people. And Medicare for All would allow doctors to do that, I think, in a very significant way. But look, to me, it really comes down to morals. I tell this story, and I've been telling it for years, but it really works. So you're going to have to bear with me a second here, Andrew. To go back to your fire department, right? Who you said you're very happy when they knock on your door. When the inception of the fire department came about, right, it was insurance. You had to purchase fire insurance and you would get a plaque to go outside your building if you had fire insurance. So let's say a building is on fire. Let's say it's your building that's on fire and the fire department comes. And if there's a plaque, they're going to put it out. And if there wasn't a plaque, what do you think they did?
I'm guessing that they didn't put it out, or that they grabbed sticks and marshmallows and chocolate and graham crackers.
Right. They let the building burn. They let the building burn. Now, I hope, to the folks listening, I hope that gives you a shocked sort of pit in your stomach. How awful. How could they do that? And then let us fast forward to today in our current medical system. One day, our children and our grandchildren are going to tell us this story and say, did you know that back in the day, doctors and hospitals would turn people away if they were sick, or people couldn't go if they couldn't afford it? And they let people get sick and die because they couldn't afford healthcare? Did you know that? And that's where I always come to, because to me, it's so immoral that we let people get sick and die. It is so immoral, especially when we all have the collective power to change it.
Is everything okay with your gallbladder?
It is. I got it removed. Everything is great. Thank you.
You're welcome. I just wanted to, didn't want to let that go by without.
I appreciate it. That's very nice of you.
I want to ask you about your views on healthcare, given the political realities of the moment. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have a divided Congress, and if polling is any indication, it's going to get even more challenging in the next Congress for Democrats to move their agenda ahead. There will be some Democrats that say, well, we should do this incrementally and make deals where we can on the margins to improve conditions overall and not hold off hoping for the whole pie. Mm-hmm. Where do you come down on this? If elected, would you be willing to vote for what I'm sure you would think of as half measures or just little improvements, or would you want to hold out for the whole thing and for universal healthcare and just vote against other improvements that you might be able to vote for along the way?
I am going to push for everything I can get to make sure people have universal healthcare. Of course, and look, I don't think that, as I said a moment ago, I don't think that Medicare for All is the be all end all. I think we need to push past that and create a real healthcare system that really includes preventive health. My hope is once we go there, universal healthcare isn't going to seem so bad. That's not going to seem like the radical option anymore, right? But of course, any opportunity to improve people's lives, I'm going to take that. I'm going to, this isn't about, an ego at all. This is about making sure that I deliver for my constituents, that I deliver for my community. And of course I won't be happy, but I'm always mad. That's why I'm running for Congress, right? Absolutely, I guess is the answer. But we don't stop there. We never stop. And I think there's a lot of tools at our disposal that we can continue to talk about why universal health care is the move forward. And I know that there are a lot of politicians out there that say, well, let's talk about a public option, right? I don't think that people realize that that would be exponentially more expensive, not just more expensive than universal healthcare, but more expensive than our current system as well. And it would still leave something like 100 million Americans underinsured and uninsured. So, it blows my mind a little bit as someone who has worked with many organizations and has seen innovation championed in the corporate world, right? To find a solution that can do more good for more people and be less expensive would be heralded in the business world, right? So the fact that we're still like having these conversations, you'll have better access to care, no more luxury bone insurance, by the way, which is fabulous, right? Look, do we value our senior citizens? Do we want them to not have to struggle and decide between their diabetes medication or a hearing aid? I mean, it is, to me, it's a no-brainer. But yes, we'll take what we can get, but we're going to keep pushing, and we're going to push further beyond universal health care to make it happen.
How would you respond to people who may be worrying that your support for Medicare for all, regardless of the benefits of that policy on the merits, might make it harder for you to win in what could be a very competitive general election this fall? It could make you a little less electable in an election that a lot of Democrats are fearing we have to win.
Yeah, I don't believe that that's true. Look, I grew up in a very red town, and I know how to talk to folks. I know how to talk to folks in my community. And I think that that's a skill set that really differentiates me from the pack of candidates here. As I said, I have moved people in the past. I've moved Republicans from, I'm a Republican who votes for Trump, to I'm supporting you in Medicare for all, right? And I think that's because too often we write each other off. Well, you're a Republican, therefore, we're not aligned. We can't build a bridge. I don't think that's true. I think that a lot of people get caught in this misinformation cycle, and when they're presented with the facts and an opportunity to improve their lives and their communities, they'll take it. Democrats are not the only folks that need healthcare, right? Republicans need healthcare too. So I just outwardly reject the notion that I may not be, that it may affect my outcomes. In fact, I think it will boost my chances. And I know that's your timer, but I'm going to squeeze in just, a little bit more, which is to say, look, the downstate portion of this district, which, is sort of the old District 3, it's interesting when you look at Long Island and folks, and I've had so many conversations with people in Westchester who have asked me, well, Melanie, what about Long Island? It just went very red in the municipal elections. And it's true, and it did. And I have a different theory on that. And again, as the only candidate in this race who's been organizing in this region, I think my theory is correct because it's supported by the results of one town in Long Island. The South Hold Democrats and who ran very progressive campaigns, even in the municipal elections, very progressive campaigns. They have a progressive Democratic leader for their Democratic club, their group, and they are the only Democrats that won. And I have a belief that Democrats actually want to vote for Democrats. They want to vote for representatives who are going to fight for our values. And I really see my candidacy as the candidacy that is bringing our party back to its FDR roots. I don't care where you are in the political spectrum. If I ask a Democrat, who is your favorite president? 9.9 times out of 10, they're telling me FDR. And if it was FDR, then you should be on board with Medicare for all and all of the other policies that I am championing.
As you mentioned, we did hit our timer on that second 20-minute period. I'm going to now, well, before I advance, a quick apology. If you're hearing any additional noise coming from my end, I have a new neighbor who's moving upstairs and moving in. So you may hear some noise from time to time. My apologies if that's the case. I'm going to set the timer to illuminate now for our final 20-minute segment. And the old TV anchor in me can't just reduce my segment to one topic. I have to ask about a lot of different things. So I'm going to start with bail reform, which has been an issue that has popped up as a local or as a state issue, rather, But it seems to be something of a measuring stick the candidates are going to be asked about. And so I want to do that here. What's your view of bail reform in New York State? Do you support it? Do you think it is responsible for any rise in crime?
So firstly, I just want to say that I think it's really important as I talk a lot about misinformation and disinformation, and I do think it's very important to highlight that bail reform is a state issue. It's not a federal issue, because there are many folks out there that would have you believe that, right? So I want to clarify that.
Fair enough. But if you, I'm going to ask if you support bail reform in New York, would you then similarly support it on a federal level?
Yeah, yes, I do support bail reform in New York. And what I was going to say is that while it is a state level issue at the moment, I do think that we have a responsibility as Democrats on the federal level as well to support our partners at the state level who I believe passed very important civil rights legislation. This is a very good topic, building off of the facts that we just laid out with Medicare for all. When we look at how Black and brown communities have been over policed for decades and decades, and the injustices, and we have seen the incarceration rate explode. And if you look at our incarceration rate globally, I mean, it is astounding the amount of people that we arrest. And part of this does go to corruption with for-profit prisons. They prey on and are looking at the school to prison pipeline. All of this is very interconnected. Look, I believe if we want to create safe communities, then we have to get to the root cause of it. I think when we have, and let me back up for folks on who may be listening, who may not know what the bail reform law did, because I think there's a lot of misinformation about that as well. Let's say that there are two people, and just for argument's sake, they each stole an apple. Okay, they each stole an apple allegedly. They were both arrested. One of those folks has a lot of money and they can pay their bail and go home. And then they go home and they can take care of their family. They can keep their job. They can get their case ready to plead to whether they stole it or not, right? They're working in a justice system in the way that it's more or less designed. There's another person who doesn't have money because they're poor, and they sit in jail and they wait. And now they likely lose their home, they lose their kids, they lose their job. And oftentimes they are sitting in jail for months at a time before their case is arraigned and heard. Now, what we often see is that those folks, because they are worried about their kids, they're worried about their mother that they're taking care of, they're worried or scared, they'll take a plea deal. And now they have a record. And now they can't get a job. And it just feeds this system. So the notion that we have, because of bail reform, we have rising crime rates is, I believe, completely inaccurate. We have seen the exact opposite. Yes, we do for folks that are, beneficiaries of bail reform. Look, in New York City, there is a little bit of a rising crime that is not happening in other counties in this district. In fact, Nassau County, which is the county that I live in, is the safest county in the entire country. And we fund, our public safety officers, our police officers, a lot with quite a bit of money. But I think if we're concerned about community safety, then let's invest in our schools. Let's invest in healthcare. Let's invest in climate, right? Let's invest in our people. Let's invest in jobs. Let's invest in opportunity, because that is how we reduce crime. That is how we do it.
Want to shift topics. And by the way, if anybody has been regularly following, listening, watching this podcast, they know what bail reform is.
Okay.
We've covered it multiple times, but I appreciate that because we expect to gain an audience as each new candidate comes forward and appears on the podcast. So thank you for that. I want to switch over. In the lead up to this interview, your campaign referred to you as an unabashed progressive Democrat. And you have certainly made that case yourself. There are other progressives running for the Democratic primary. I'm wondering why you are a better progressive choice for voters who lean towards the progressive side. And are you suggesting that other progressives are abashed in their support of progressive policies?
Well, I'm not sure which other candidates you're referring to at the moment. Look, what I can say is that I have been crystal clear on my priorities, on the issues that I'm fighting for. They have always centered the needs of our community. They're always centered in the notion of doing the most good and helping the most folks. And I've done that when I was an organizer. I have done that when I was the only voice in the room, standing up and fighting and educating. I'm the only one in the race that hasn't flip-flopped on my positions. And don't get me wrong, I'm very glad to see people moving, and I hope it sticks. I hope it sticks post-election. But I am the candidate in this race that has done the work. That's why I believe that I'm the candidate that will win. All the progressive groups have endorsed me. I have the most, and frankly, some non-progressive groups have endorsed me. A lot of mainstream Democratic groups have endorsed me. I have the most endorsements of any candidate in this race. We've got the biggest grassroots army, the most volunteers, and I have built coalitions. And as we've talked about numerous times over the course of this hour, I have brought people together in really, really meaningful ways because I'm doing the hard work in the community. And that is how I know we will win.
It just doesn't seem like that's working on the national level. It seems like our political dialogue is broken, not just our politics, but our political dialogue feels broken.
What is happening at the national level and what is happening at the local party levels? We are seeing fear take the front seat. And when fear takes the front seat, it says, oh, wait a second, maybe we can't win. Maybe we have to go more to the right. Maybe we have to dial this back. We couldn't pass Build Back Better, and that was too radical. Frankly, Build Back Better wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to address the crises we face. It wasn't enough to meet the moment that we're in. We needed to go bigger. We needed to go bolder. And that is why we're losing people. I believe if we continue to run candidates who are unsure of where they stand, candidates who are unafraid to take on the hard fights, unafraid to take a real stance, unafraid to invest in our communities, then we will keep losing. The only way I see us winning and doing well in the midterms is having candidates run who are fighting with every fiber of their being to bring this party back home. I feel as a progressive, I am representing the Democratic wing of our party because we're having a little bit of an identity crisis at the moment.
I appreciate you making that point, and that's certainly a valid argument for electing more Democrats overall and electing more Democrats to Congress. But let's view the current political moment from the perspective of let's say a longtime Democrat who has been schooled on civics lessons that tell you that the nation has been well served by compromise over its years. That in fact the country has managed to stay a country in large part because of key compromises that have been made along the way. And then in this political moment, you have Republicans seeming to run further and further right, and Democrats now running further and further left, including you running as a progressive Democrat. Doesn't that make it harder to come together and find compromise when it's essential for the national interest? Isn't the polarization making it harder?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the goal is not bipartisanship. The goal is to deliver for our people. That is the goal. When we pass do-nothing bills that are symbolic and don't help anybody, that does not help our country at all. That further divides us, right? And it feeds that cycle. Look, I am very happy to compromise with anybody as long as they're coming to the table in good faith. And that is a key piece of this. Too often we get stuck in this mindset, well, we have to be reasonable. We have to be moderate. Absolutely. Okay, be reasonable. But let's be reasonable about the fact that Republicans are not coming to the table. And even if we try, which we did with Build Back Better, and we saw the amount of investment go down and down and down and down, right? It just kept decreasing because we kept coming to the table. We kept giving in to what Republicans wanted. And they said, no, I'm not doing that. We want less now. So I think the key is really finding solutions that our people need and being as clear and transparent about it as possible. I'm not afraid to use my platform for good and help people understand and make those calls to Mitch McConnell. I'll go to Kentucky. I'll knock those doors. I'll talk to those voters the same way I do in the red areas of Long Island. I don't mind. But that's the way we're going to save this country. We're polarized because we're not getting anything done.
But isn't there a danger? You obviously support the Democratic agenda, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, as you've been fond of saying through the interview.
That's
But
right.
but don't you run the risk that the only way you can ever implement that Democratic agenda is if you have a Democrat in the White House and a Democratic majority in the House, and not only a Democratic majority in the Senate, but a supermajority in the Senate? Otherwise, you're never going to be able to implement the Democratic agenda that you're pursuing, much in the same way that Republicans won't be able to implement a Republican agenda unless they have all of the branches of government in their favor.
Well, I'll tell you what, for decades and decades, we've done it that way. We've compromised the Democratic agenda. We've watered it down. We've played the Republican game, and the Overton window keeps shifting to the right. When you look at polling and you look at what Americans want, it is not that. It is not less services. It is not less investment. Americans want jobs. They want action on climate. They want healthcare. They want schools. They want safe communities. That's what they want. Right now, you have more and more Americans throwing their hands up saying our government is broken and they're turning their back. You think crime is an issue now? Wait until climate change really kicks in. Wait until these opportunities drive up. It is our responsibility as people of this country to step up and try to fight for it. I will fight for every scrap I can get until the entire time I'm in office. I will do everything I can to implement the agenda that I want. But you better believe that I am dragging that other side back. And thank goodness we have candidates like me and representatives who are putting people over profits, because we're the ones holding it down. We're the ones keeping it from all crumbling. What's the outcome? Or excuse me, what is the other option, right? Right now, as it is, we're about to see Roe v. Wade get gutted or be completely overturned because Democrats have given in and watered it down and given in and watered it down. Compromise, yes, but it has to be in good faith. And it doesn't mean we can let down, frankly, the voters that made it possible for the Democrats to hold the majority. What have we done for Black and Brown people in America? That's the question that every politician should be asking. What have we done for the disabled community? That's what we need to be asking. We can't expect voters to turn out if we're not going to show up for our people.
If the current polling is correct, and certainly the conventional wisdom about the out party in midterm elections is correct, odds are if you win election to represent the third district, you could very easily find yourself in the minority in the House of Representatives. Best case scenarios, it's about where it is now, a few votes margin in your favor, but odds are you'd be in the minority. You strike me as though you're itching for a fight a little bit, which would kind of, I mean, well, what would be your approach for being in the minority when your job would basically be opposing Republican agendas that are trying to be pushed forward? How would you bring that fight to the Republic?
Look, I've got a lot of fight in me. I did grow up on the South Shore of Long Island after all. But no, I'm not trying to pick a fight. I'm trying to deliver for our people. I'm trying to deliver for this district. I am trying to breathe some fresh air back into this party and make it stand for something. Let us live our values. Look, as during my career, I built coalitions with some of the most discerning stakeholders at some of the most discerning companies in the country. And if I could bring them together, I'm pretty confident that I could do the same in DC. I'm not itching for a fight. I am itching to make this world, make this country a better place, because I know that we deserve it. And I'm sick and tired of politicians selling us out. I'm sick and tired of the people on the margins being ignored. And I'm ready to take that fight to DC, but I'm not looking to pick a fight there. I'm looking to fight for my constituents.
I want to shift and ask you a few questions about the middle class and the squeeze that the middle class is being put under, especially in the third district, which is a suburban district, with the exception of the Queens and the Bronx parts. But you almost have to be in the middle class and probably towards the top of the middle class just to find a comfortable home in the third district. Everything's getting more expensive. Real estate is incredibly expensive. What can you do? What should be done to try to help the middle class and just take some of the pressure, some of the burden off of the middle class right now?
Yeah. Well, I would also say, look, we talk a lot about homeowners, but there's also a ton of renters in this district as well. The cost of living in this district is very, very high. We often get means tested out of many of the programs that Congress does pass. And that is something that I would push back against. At the very least, there needs to be a cost of living adjustment. Many of our middle class families, and I know certainly some people would scoff at this, but look, a family making $128,000 a year that has a couple kids in this district, in many areas of the district, is barely scraping by. And to be means tested out of COVID relief is really, it was awful. It was awful. And I heard about it from a lot of families. But even these additional proposals, canceling student debt, free college, this district would be means tested out. So I would fight to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I would talk about the importance of ending means testing. I think, many of the additional problems we face and the rise in hate that we're seeing in our communities, a lot of this happens because we other each other. So I am looking for ways to bring us together and make us more equal, not other each other. I also, as you know, we talked extensively about healthcare, but universal healthcare would help middle-class families. It would help Black and Brown communities. It would help poor communities immensely. So that is something that I'd be looking to do. Look, we know that we have a lot of work to do to combat climate change. There has to be significant investment frankly, across a variety of sectors. I think this particular district, as it hugs the Sound, is a prime district to be a real model in climate resiliency. I think we can bring a lot of well-paying jobs, union jobs, to the district that will help middle-class families. At the end of the day, I think we need someone that just understands, and I mean really understands, what it's like to grow up in a middle-class family. I strive to grow up in a middle-class family when I was growing up. I was raised by my grandparents, and it was a union household, but there were a lot of mouths to feed in that house, and we didn't always have dinner every night. And I feel like I'm bringing a different perspective, this lived experience to this race. And I feel fortunate that I'm in a position right now where I can run this race and really speak truth about what it's like to be, someone who's working poor or even middle class, and the struggles that we face. Because as I mentioned earlier at this episode, look, if we keep electing the same very wealthy, very connected politicians, we should expect exactly the same as what we've got. We need a different kind of politician. And that's why I feel that I'm the best candidate for this race.
One of the biggest question marks that I have when it comes to the middle class in the 3rd district is real estate. Because for most people, real estate is the single biggest investment that they make, and it's the single biggest source of their wealth. And for somebody who moved into this district 30, 40 years ago, they've seen their wealth increase because of the value of their real estate. But at the same time, it benefits those people. Rising real estate makes it less attainable for people who are trying to start in the middle class or get a foothold in the middle class. And that's also had impacted rents for people who are just trying to live their lives while they're building up equity to own a place of their own. How do we balance those competing interests? How do we balance continuing to make real estate a good investment, a bedrock investment, while still giving people access to it, without, which I guess means not letting the cost of it go so sky high that it becomes completely out of reach?
Yeah, and that's the age-old question, right? And I think it's something that I hear pretty frequently in the district from constituents. And interestingly, when we talked about affordable housing, it used to be just a problem for, the working poor and the working class and middle class. And now there has been a shift, right? I hear it from folks that are quite well off who are worried that their children, once they graduate, can't move back home because they can't afford it. And therein, I think, lies the opportunity. While we're approaching it from different sides of the same coin, I do think that there's an opportunity to build bridges and build a coalition there to change some of the potentially ideas about affordable housing and what that looks like in our communities. I also think we are in a unique position right now. As I mentioned, we need massive investment in climate change. We need to re-weatherize and rebuild and certainly renovate a lot of our existing units. And I think there's an opportunity to create affordable housing with green initiatives. That is my hope. But frankly, I'm working with several organizations at the moment. When we talk about affordable housing, oftentimes it is centered around urban areas. Like in New York, we talk about NYCHA, but there really have not been a ton of initiatives in the suburbs. And when there is significant pushback. So I think it's going to require a lot of education and bringing people together. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm very, very encouraged.
Sorry, I was just getting distracted because my timer is at 5 seconds. So I figure I'll filibuster out the rest of this time and finish this topic. This is the whole podcast is really just a technique for me to learn what all of the alarms sound like on my iPhone. Okay. So we're through our 3 topics and we're moving on to the candidate questionnaire. This is designed to be a quicker set of questions. There are 13 of them, designed to go from more serious to less serious, more or less, and designed to be a little bit quicker, though this first one generally is not, though you've sort of touched on this already. The winner of this race in the 3rd district, if the trends continue and the courts permit the district lines to stay in the same place, would be in the driver's seat to hold this seat in Congress for the next decade, potentially. So what steps will you take, perhaps above and beyond what the law and ethics rules require, to ensure to voters in the 3rd district that you are not profiting from your position if elected?
Yeah, I absolutely refuse corporate money, as I mentioned earlier, and I hope to set the standard, and I hope to mentor other candidates as well to do the same. I'll continue to bring education around it. I will be involved in every community, which, as we have this many beautiful communities that are now part of the 3rd district, and continue to legislate policy that is people-centered and district-centered.
Lots of disclosures. You'll keep constituents updated on,
Yeah, I'm certainly an open book. We're funded by people, primarily. So no corporate money here, and that will never change.
Question number 2, if given your choice, which congressional committees would you want to sit on and why?
Yeah. Well, I've spent quite a bit of time in DC. I've spent quite a bit of time in the hearing rooms. In fact, when I get there, you can often not pull me out of the room. But what I'm looking at, I'd love to be on oversight. I'd love to be on appropriations. I also think energy and commerce is going to be really important. And perhaps surprisingly, I'd love to sit on the agriculture committee. I have a policy coming out, a Green New Deal for agriculture. And it's going to be really important as we address the climate crisis to draw down carbon. And I think I've got a pretty solid solution, at least to begin to tackle that problem.
Agriculture also oversees food stamps in this country. It's just
That's right.
Because it's an agricultural boost. Question number 3. Assuming the mainstream reporting is accurate, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, should Donald Trump face criminal prosecution?
Yes.
Should Clarence Thomas be impeached?
Yes.
Even if doing both or either all but guarantees reprisals, whether they're justified or not, from Republicans against Democrats?
We have to do the right thing. Either we are a country of, if we are a country of values, if we are a country that abides by our laws and our regulations, absolutely yes. We don't bend the system to our will because it didn't work out, or it may potentially, have some sort of repercussion.
Number 4, is there ever a circumstance where it would be appropriate for a member of Congress to lie to constituents?
No.
What about not telling the whole truth?
Not that I can think of at this moment. You know what I'm thinking of at this moment, actually? Did you see the movie Don't Look Up?
I haven't seen it yet.
You have to see it.
I haven't seen it yet.
You have to see it. I think, I am a big proponent, as we've talked about, of transparency. I want to bring people into this process. I want to demystify government and the legislative process. I do think there are, I can't imagine as a first-time congressional or as the junior congressional rep that I would be privy to, of course, there's some information that I would not be able to disclose, protected information, but as much as possible, I will absolutely be transparent in bringing folks in. That's my job. It's not my job to keep secrets from constituents. It's my job to represent them. So how can they accurately know how to vote, or how to express their feelings and opinions if they don't have the information that I have?
Question number 5, State a public policy position or a decision that you've made in the past with which you now disagree.
When I was very young, very, very young, when I was in high school, I was raised Catholic, and I was raised to think that abortion was the worst thing that someone could do. And when I think probably when I went to college, I went to Barnard in New York City. That's when all of that shifted, which I think for a lot of folks, right, your world opens up. And I started to learn more. I think I just had this very singular view of it, that it was something that I would never, ever do, because I was told that it was the most horrible sin you could commit as a Catholic. And here I am today with, a very staunch supporter of abortion rights for all.
The next question, which I believe is number 6, name a position that you hold that you think might be out of step with the bulk of the Democratic Party.
Getting corporate money out of politics.
That's a fair one, and a bit of low-hanging fruit that I just set out for you. Moving on to number 7. If you win this election, you'll be up for re-election in 2024, which of course is a presidential year. Mm-hmm. Should Joe Biden be the Democratic nominee for president in 2024, or should he step aside for a new generation of leaders?
I think, look, I think it depends. It's not a question that I have enough information about, in this given moment to answer. I think if he can duly serve, then, he has shown a willingness to to want to work with all factions of the Democratic Party, which, as a progressive, I have appreciated, even though we didn't get the wins that, we had hoped. I think he does definitely get points for that. But, we'll have to see. I mean, he's, it depends. We can't read the tea leaves, but right now, we'll see what happens.
The reason I added that question, I'm fascinated by how people answer it. Question number 8. What is the best Republican idea that you've heard lately?
Best Republican idea that I have heard lately. Oof. Now you've stumped me, Andrew.
Being stumped is a perfectly acceptable answer.
I'm stumped. Yeah, I'm stumped.
Fair enough. We'll move on to question number 9. Could you ever support Andrew Cuomo in the future?
No.
How about Al Franken?
No.
Okay. Question number 10. Have you ever imagined yourself in any sort of dream or fantasy as the president of the United States?
No, I have not.
Never in your life?
I don't know, maybe as a child, but not in recent memory, not in the last 30 years or so, I think.
Fair enough. Question number 11. Name your favorite sports teams.
The Yankees, the Giants. Those are kind of my go. The Knicks, although, they've been the New York Liberty. I actually, fun fact for you. I was part of the Liberty Torch Patrol for 3 years. So I performed at Madison Square Garden during their games for 3 years when I was a lot younger.
You know what? That's the first shout out to the Liberty in asking this question. So very nicely done.
Thank you.
Question number 12. What's your favorite political movie or TV show and why?
Ooh, favorite political movie or TV show? I mean, well, recently I was very impressed with Don't Look Up. So I hope that you will see that. I watch a lot of news shows, I don't know that I have necessarily a favorite these days, but I would say, current events, let's go with Don't Look Up.
I just got around to watching the Jon Stewart, Steve Carell political movie. So and it had such an impact on me that I've forgotten the name of it.
The one, is that the one where Steve Carell goes to that small town?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, it made its points, but a little on the nose for my liking. But
well, Don't Look Up is very difficult to watch. It's not going to be enjoyable, but and it is. If you thought that movie was on the nose, this one will punch you in the nose.
That would not be the first time that's happened. So that question leads nicely into the final question in the questionnaire, number 13. My answer to the political movie or TV show is The West Wing. I was a huge fan of The West Wing. And in an early episode of The West Wing, the president, played by Martin Sheen, President Bartlett, says he wants to speak out on issues. And he says, this is more important than re-election. Basically, he's saying, I'm willing to risk not winning a second term so that I can be active on this front, so I can speak my mind on this front. And that resonates with me because it seems like too many people in politics these days seem to be focused primarily on getting themselves reelected, which I can't figure out why, but that's not the question that I'm asking. What I'm asking is what's more important than reelection to you? What's more important to your own than your own success or political future? Where would you draw that line?
Yeah. So, I will tell you, I have not watched The West Wing, which I know that's another fun fact, but
I'm not prepared to hold that against you at this point. That's fine. We all come to The West Wing in our own time.
I will share, a little personal story. When I decided to run in 2019, we had a family conversation. My family and I are very, very tight, very close. We do a lot of activities, a lot of political activities together. And, my husband has been unbelievably supportive of me and my run and been very encouraging. And I sat him down and I said, look, you have to be prepared that if I run and I win, I might only serve for 2 years. And he looked at me and he said, why would you only serve for 2 years? And I said to him, because when I win, I am going to work as hard as I can every single day to pass the agenda that I'm running on, because that's what running for office is about. It's not about the political trades, the political deals, the diciness, the this, the that, it's not even about the reelection. Now, of course, the agenda that I'm fighting for, if done well, should earn me reelection, but I will sleep very, very well at night, knowing that I represented this district the way a representative should represent a district. I will sleep great for the rest of my life knowing that. But so I hope that answers your question there. To me, it's not about a reelection. It's about passing the policies that we know people really need, because frankly, the policies I'm running on are life and death for a lot of people.
Melanie D'Ariggo, how can we find your campaign online or via social media?
Yes, well, my website is Duriego2022.com. That's DARRIGO2022.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Duriego for Congress, or on Twitter at Duriego Melanie.
And we will include some of the information on the episode description if you're listening to this podcast online, or if you're watching it on YouTube. We will also have the links to that as well. Final question. We're going through the 6 candidates in the field, and we should be getting to the end of that fairly soon. My hope is to invite candidates back to do one-on-one debates, because you can't have more than one-on-one without getting messed up on Zoom. Would you be interested in doing that if we can work out the details?
Absolutely.
Melanie D'Ariggo, thank you so much for being a part of the 3 on NY3 podcast. Best of luck with your campaign, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun today.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And that just about brings us to the close of this episode of the 3 on NY3 podcast. My thanks to Melanie D'Ariggo and her campaign team. To learn more about her and her campaign, you can find her at Duriego2022.com. That's DARRIGO2022.com. Her Twitter handle is at Duriego Melanie. That's at DARRIGO MELANIE. My name is Andrew Whitman. I'm not going to spell it for you. You can follow the show on Twitter. The show's handle is at 3onNY3. Mine is at Whitman Andrew. I'm still not going to spell it for you. Video versions of the podcast are available on YouTube. Audio streams can be found on all major podcast apps. Just search for 3onNY3. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever and however you're consuming it. Tell a friend, yada, yada, yada. To contact the show, questions, complaints, whatever, email the show at 3onNY3@gmail.com. Reminders, primary day is June 28th. Election day is November 8th. This has been 3 on NY3 with Andrew Whitman. Bye-bye for now.